They say justice is blind in New York, but in this case, it seemed to have chosen sides. On one side, a powerful man surrounded by expensive lawyers. On the other, a humble, invisible mother, afraid even to look up. Fate seemed written. She would lose her daughter. But before understanding how this battle reached court, you need to know who this woman was. A mother who worked until her body ached but never let love run out. A silent warrior who never imagined her simple life was about to turn into a story impossible to believe. Because sometimes it is in the most fragile heart that the courage capable of challenging giants is born.
Maria Turner woke up every day before sunrise in the Bronx, New York City. Her alarm clock rang at 5:30, and she rose without complaint, even though her body cried out for a few more hours of rest. In that small apartment, shared with her daughter, there were only two simple beds, an antique wardrobe, and a weathered wooden table. What sustained that home was not luxury or comfort, but the strength of a woman who refused to give up. Her greatest treasure lay not in the household items, but in the smile of the little girl sleeping peacefully beside her. She quickly got ready, donning the blue uniform of a general services assistant at the hospital where she worked. She hurriedly tied her hair into a bun, put on her worn-out shoes, and prepared the strong black coffee that would sustain her during the long journey. In the small kitchen, the smell of coffee mingled with that of stale bread warming in the pan. Maria looked at her still sleeping daughter and smiled, even though she knew the day would be hard. For her, the sacrifice was light compared to the privilege of seeing her daughter grow up with dignity. The routine was always the same: 2 crowded buses to downtown Manhattan, long hours scrubbing hallways, cleaning rooms, and collecting hospital waste. Her co-workers recognized her as a hard-working woman, always willing, always silent. She rarely complained, even when the burden seemed overwhelming. Amid her exhaustion, her mind found strength in thinking about her daughter. It was for her that Maria endured the backache, the calluses on her hands, and the sleepless nights. Life might be hard, but love was stronger. At night, when she finally returned home, the scene changed. Maria left the noisy hospital behind and returned to being just a mother. At the small table in the living room, she helped her daughter with her homework, corrected words, and taught her math, even though she hadn't completed her own studies. She made a point of cooking fresh rice and beans, tidying the house, and organizing the uniform for the next day. Nothing brought her more joy than hearing her daughter say, "Mom, you're the best teacher in the world." It was at these times that Maria felt grown up, despite all her simplicity. In that home, there was no material wealth, but there was something no amount of money could buy: love. A love expressed in every detail, in the plate of food served, in the hug before bed, in the words of encouragement in the face of difficulties. Maria knew that life was unfair, that the world was cruel to those who had little, but she didn't allow her daughter to feel ashamed of her origins. Instead, she taught her daughter that dignity and honesty were a person's greatest assets. And with this legacy, the humble mother transformed each day into a silent victory.
But the tranquility of that simple routine was about to be shattered. One day, Maria received an official notice from the Manhattan family court. It was a custody case filed by John Davis, the girl's father, who had disappeared for years. Her hands trembled as she read those formal words that felt more like a death sentence. How could that absent and indifferent man have the courage to ask for his daughter back? Deep down, Maria knew there was something hidden in that sudden move. John had always been an ambitious man, accustomed to showing off, even though he lacked the character to back up his appearances. He had never cared about the girl, never paid child support, never attended school meetings. But now, suddenly, he appeared as a concerned father, demanding sole custody. The truth, however, was grim. He had discovered that his daughter would inherit a fortune from her maternal grandfather, and this inheritance was the real reason behind the farce disguised as affection. To fight this case, John wasn't alone. He brought along renowned attorney James Morgan, known throughout New York for his arrogant demeanor and exorbitant fees. Always dressed in expensive suits, he was feared by his opponents in court. An easy case, he would say, confident that defeating a poor woman would be like crushing an ant. To him, Maria Turner was nothing more than a humble, uneducated mother, incapable of facing the arguments of the law. But there was something neither he nor John could have foreseen. At the first hearing, the shock was inevitable. John appeared in an expensive suit, wearing a smile of false concern. He spoke to the judge as if he were the most devoted father in the world, extolling his desire to care for his daughter. Meanwhile, attorney James Morgan attacked mercilessly. He painted Maria as a neglectful mother, incapable of supporting her child, a woman who could barely read, let alone raise someone with dignity. The courtroom murmured, and even the judge seemed inclined to believe the elite lawyer's eloquence. Maria, ashamed, lowered her head. She had no words, no advocate, no strength. Each sentence Morgan spoke was like a knife to her dignity. Her heart shattered, fearing she would lose what she loved most in life. And in that scene, it seemed as if fate had already been written.
The courtroom was packed that morning. In the center of the room, Maria Turner seemed hunched in her chair, clutching her sweaty hands. John and James, on the other hand, occupied the space arrogantly, as if already celebrating victory. Judge Mark Stevens watched silently as the father's defense arguments were laid out one by one. Each word was an attempt to reduce Maria to insignificance. Each sentence, a brick in the wall that seemed to separate her from her daughter. James, with his deep, confident voice, spared no attack. "Your Honor, we're dealing with a mother who works too hard, who abandons her daughter at home, who doesn't provide the minimum conditions for a dignified survival." The lawyer gestured theatrically, pointing at Maria as if she were the personification of failure. John nodded, agreeing with each accusation, and even smiled as if anticipating triumph. The audience murmured in agreement, shaking their heads in disapproval of the humble woman. The words echoed like hammer blows in Maria's heart. She wanted to scream, to say that none of it was true, but her voice wouldn't come. The weight of inequality suffocated her, reminding her of her social status. How could a simple utility worker stand up to powerful men, surrounded by laws and money? Shame overcame her, making her tears flow silently. In the eyes of many, that battle was already lost before it even began. John, noticing his ex-partner's silence, took the opportunity to reinforce his charade. "I only want the best for my daughter," he said, feigning emotion. "It's not fair that she grows up in poverty, without infrastructure, without a future." His words were calculated to move the judge and the audience. But behind the act, there was only greed. The inheritance the girl would inherit in a few years was the real target. Nothing else mattered to that man other than the money he could control. Maria lowered her head, feeling defeated. The public humiliation was unbearable. The tears streaming down her face revealed her powerlessness before the court. She had no lawyer, no defense, no voice. The weight of the accusations seemed to crush any hope. John and James smiled, believing victory was in their hands. But in that moment of pain and silence, a small flame was beginning to ignite, and that flame would come from the most unlikely person of all.
Suddenly, the silence was broken by a thin but firm voice echoing through the Manhattan family courtroom. "Your Honor, I wish to speak." Everyone turned in disbelief to see where the courage was coming from. It was Emily, their 7-year-old daughter, rising from the audience bench. In her small arms, she carried a pink folder decorated with star and heart stickers. Her brown eyes shone with determination, even as her heart raced in her chest. Judge Mark Stevens watched her in surprise, slowly removing his glasses. "Child, this is no place for games," he said patiently. But Emily didn't back down. She lifted her chin and replied firmly, "I'm not joking, Your Honor. I'm my mother's lawyer." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Secretaries, lawyers, and even the security guard at the door stopped what they were doing to watch this unprecedented scene. John couldn't contain his laughter, mocking his own daughter. "This is absurd. She's barely out of diapers, and she thinks she can participate in a lawsuit." Beside him, lawyer James Morgan demanded that the girl be removed from the room. But Emily remained firm in her position. Her eyes didn't twitch, her voice didn't waver, and with the calm of someone who knew what she was doing, she stated, "According to Article 28 of the Child and Adolescent Statute, I have the right to be heard in any proceedings involving my life." The courtroom fell into absolute silence. The judge leaned forward, impressed. Never in his decades of practice had he witnessed a child cite the law with such conviction. Attorney James stammered, trying to dismiss the girl. "She memorized that from the internet, Your Honor." But Emily merely smiled politely. "Then may I continue, Doctor?" Her answer disarmed even the most skeptical. The little girl was beginning to show she wasn't there to play. Maria, from the back of the room, watched everything with tears in her eyes. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her daughter, so small, stood before giants, facing lawyers and a greedy father. The one she had always protected now became her defender. A feeling of pride and fear mingled in her heart. Pride for her daughter's courage, fear of the injustice that could silence her. But in that moment, the humble woman realized she was no longer alone.
Emily walked to the front of the courtroom with firm, if small, steps. She placed the pink folder on the table and began carefully opening each document she had brought. First, she displayed her William McKinley Public School report card, proving she was the top student in her class with impeccable grades. Then she presented a statement from her teacher, confirming her mother's consistent presence at meetings and activities. The audience watched in silence, increasingly surprised by her organization. Attorney James tried to interrupt, but Emily remained unfazed. "Doctor, excuse me. Section 1634 of the U.S. Civil Code. Parents have the duty to support and educate their children. My father failed in this duty when he abandoned me for 3 years." A heavy silence fell over the room. John, who had been smiling before, now swallowed hard. Murmurs grew louder among those present. The judge wrote down every word, impressed by the girl's clarity. For the first time,
The powerful were at a loss before a child. Then Emily revealed her most devastating piece of evidence. She pulled an old cell phone from the bottom of her briefcase and said firmly, "Here's a recording of my father, himself confessing that he only wants custody of me because of my grandfather's inheritance." The courtroom was shocked. The judge authorized the playback, and soon John's voice echoed through the courtroom. "I want custody of her, not because I care, but because I want to manage the $2 million she's going to inherit." The courtroom erupted in indignation. John turned pale as a sheet. Attorney James stood up, furious. "Your Honor, this is illegal evidence, a clandestine recording." But Emily faced him calmly. Law 13441 of 2017, Article 4, Item 2. Recordings made to protect children's rights are not clandestine. The answer made the lawyer stutter, unable to formulate a counter-argument. The audience applauded discreetly, defying the conventions of the courtroom. For once, it wasn't money or arrogance that ruled the court, but the pure truth coming from the mouth of a child. Maria wept softly, hiding her face in her hands. Each word her daughter spoke was like a ray of light piercing years of silence and submission. Emily, firm, concluded, looking at the judge. "My father doesn't want to raise me. He wants to use me. Love isn't measured in money, Your Honor. My mother gives me love every day, and it's with her that I want to be." The entire courtroom remained in absolute silence, impacted by the weight of those words. The confrontation had only just begun, but it had already changed the course of that story.
Judge Mark Stevens leaned forward, visibly moved by the girl's firmness. "Emily, is there anything else you wish to say before I render my decision?" The entire courtroom waited in silence, as if time had stopped. The little girl took a deep breath, clutched the folder to her chest, and walked a few more steps until she stood facing her father. Her gaze wasn't one of hatred, but of a coldness that betrayed precocious maturity. The audience's hearts seemed to beat along with hers. With a firm voice, Emily stared at John. "Dad, I spent 7 years of my life waiting for you to show up. I waited at birthday parties, at school performance days, at doctor's appointments. I waited for a hug, a word, a sign that you cared. But you never came. Now I understand why. You don't see me as a daughter. You see me as money." The sentence cut through the courtroom like an invisible blade. John couldn't hold her gaze. Attorney James tried to intervene, but Emily raised her hand and continued. "Your Honor, I don't want my grandfather's inheritance. I publicly renounce the $2 million I will one day receive, because I'd rather be poor with love than rich with abandon." Shock rippled through the room. Everyone looked at each other in disbelief at the child's strength. The audience, which had previously murmured against Maria, now began to wipe away discreet tears. The judge remained silent, absorbing every word. John stood up in despair. "That's not possible. She's a minor. She has no right to renounce." But Emily, with impressive calm, replied, "Article 1804 of the United States Civil Code, Doctor. The renouncement can be made by the legal representative. My mother will sign on my behalf. And you know why? Because I don't want to be tied to you because of money." Her maturity made even the most experienced lawyers blush. John slumped in his chair, defeated not by the law, but by his own daughter. Maria, unable to contain her emotion, let out a loud sob. The entire courtroom turned its eyes to her,
a humble woman now defended by the most unlikely force, her daughter's voice. Emily turned to the judge for the last time. "Your Honor, I only ask one thing, that you let me continue to be by my mother's side, because she is the one who gives me everything that matters in life: love, care, and truth." The words echoed through the courtroom, and no one dared doubt that extraordinary girl anymore.
Judge Mark Stevens took a deep breath and removed his glasses, slowly wiping his handkerchief. The entire courtroom waited in absolute silence, as if the world had stopped, awaiting his decision. His voice cracking, he began, "In over 30 years of practice, I have never witnessed anything so extraordinary." John tried to open his mouth, but the judge raised his hand, commanding respect. "Today, it wasn't an expensive lawyer who convinced me, but the naked, simple truth of a child's voice." He stood solemnly, picking up the wooden gavel. "In light of the evidence presented, and especially the clear and conscious statement of the minor, Emily Turner, this court rules: sole custody remains with the mother, Maria Turner. John Davis's request is denied in its entirety." A murmur of emotion ran through the courtroom, followed by spontaneous applause. The judge concluded, "Furthermore, any visitation rights of the petitioner are suspended." It was the victory of truth over lies. John, defeated, lowered his head. His arrogance had crumbled before everyone's eyes. Attorney James Morgan, at a loss for arguments, hurriedly closed his briefcase, trying to hide his embarrassment. The audience gave a standing ovation, recognizing the courage of a girl who had transformed the courtroom. In the back row, Maria Turner couldn't hold back her tears. She felt the weight of injustice dissipate, giving way to the lightness of hope. The impossible had happened before her weary eyes. Emily ran to her mother and hugged her tightly. Maria wrapped her arms around her, crying profusely, as if she had just won the greatest battle of her life. "I love you, Mom," the girl whispered. "And I love you even more, my daughter," Maria replied, sobbing. Those simple words carried the weight of a lifetime of struggle. The audience watched in emotion, aware that they were witnessing a historic moment of love and justice. That day in New York, a humble woman stopped being invisible, because her 7-year-old daughter defended her before the judge and transformed her into a giant in the face of life. And thus it was proven that love, even from small voices, has the power to tear down the walls of injustice. The gavel had ended the hearing, but the story would forever echo in the hearts of all present. The humble mother had won.
In that New York courtroom, it wasn't money or the eloquence of expensive lawyers that prevailed. It was the courage of a child and the dignity of a mother. Maria Turner proved before everyone that even the humblest can become giants when love is their only defense. Emily, at just 7 years old, showed the world that truth has no age, and that when a daughter speaks out for her mother, no power can silence her. If this story touched you, share it now. Show the world that true love can overcome any injustice. Leave your comment. What would you do in this girl's place? And follow our channel for more stories of courage, justice, and transformation.